Hello and welcome back to Crossroads Conversations. I'm Said, joined once again by Dr. Jared and Esra. Today we are diving into a very important topic which is often overlooked. We are going into mental health and we'll be talking about Esra's journey, who is our guest for today, and she is a very inspiring voice. She has Turkish roots, but she has grown up and spent a lot of time in Canada. And we will understand her international experience, be it learning, working, and we will dive deep into what she thinks about Ankara too.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jared, your other co-host. Nice to be back again. And Esra, it's nice to have you with us. If you wouldn't mind, let's start at the beginning. Could you tell us a bit about what drew you to psychology in the first place?
Thank you for having me. Psychology is an interesting field. I was raised in Canada, and during my high school years, we were given the opportunity to select elective courses such as business, cooking, parenting, and psychology. What had me interested was the psychology field, specifically the way people think, feel, and behave, how everything is interconnected, whether it groups, the social system, and a country, while it being mysterious.
That's amazing. And since you have also lived in Canada, and as I mentioned, you also have really strong Turkish roots. So do you think living in this diverse atmosphere, one in Turkish society, also living in Canada, probably you had friends, so you were very well associated with Canadian culture, but also living with a Turkish family. Do you think this diversification of your social background, has this somehow shaped your understanding of psychology?
It has. So I was raised in a Turkish household while I was in a society that was dominated by Western culture. However, Canada is a multicultural country, so we have diverse people from different cultural backgrounds. So mental health is a different topic. I wasn't raised with the Turkish cultural perception of mental health. My parents were viewing the topic of mental health, whether it be therapy or psychopathologies, as something that is normal.
I have a question. What is psychopathology? I've never heard that term before. I wonder.
So it is mental health problems such as depression, schizophrenia, bipolar illness, and so on.
Interesting. So thank you for sharing that information with me.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I see a lot of similarities between psychology and sociology in my own field of study. I'm especially interested, as being an international person myself, an immigrant in Turkey, if there were any differences that you noticed or anything that stood out to you between Canada and Turkey in their approaches to mental health.
That's an excellent question. Although I live in Turkey, I don't have that much knowledge and experience in the mental health field. However, I graduated from a university in Canada, bachelor's in psychology, and then I pursued a master's degree in counseling psychology. Those two fields of work really contributed to my knowledge and understanding of mental health in Canada, especially that we are a multicultural country, so we have diverse people. They are either from foreign countries or within Canada, specifically Indigenous people. And in Canada, we have a different approach for such individuals, such populations. For example, with Indigenous people, they are needing more of a spiritual approach. But in Turkey, it's also somewhat similar. They may turn to spiritual and religious leaders instead of seeking mental health support from a psychologist.
Would you say that seeking professional mental health is still somewhat stigmatized in some countries?
Yes, of course. It is also in Canada too, of course. In Turkey, it is also stigmatized, especially those families who are conservative. They may seem, because Turkey is a collectivistic culture, they're very maybe not sharing too much information about themselves. Whereas Canada is an individualistic country. People are more open and find more information about others as normal.
Yeah, America, I think, is similar to Canada in that sense. Very individualistic culture, cultural norms in that way, and less of the traditional, I guess, cultural patterns. Does education play any role in this and people's understanding about mental health?
Yes, it does actually. If those people who have studied psychology or sociology going into the mental health fields, it is giving insight to them and understanding of how delicate the mental health is. And those who do not have experience or knowledge about mental health may find it abnormal. So having the knowledge allows them to really see that whether it's males or females, it's a human situation to have mental health problems, and seeking therapy is the most important part of it. But according to the family, however these people are raised, they may be influenced by their parents. For example, people who have a mental illness, they're not normal. And so this may convince the children to perceive it as abnormal. However, if these children have grown up and entered the psychology field, then they may shift their beliefs about seeking help.
So having more of a broad understanding of psychology in the society helps destigmatize it, basically, and make it more accessible to more people. It sounds like that's kind of what you're saying.
Yes, definitely. Exactly.
Interesting.
So that's so fascinating. The way you mentioned the things about not just the Turkish society, but the Canadian, but also the native population of Canada, the indigenous people, as you said. Also, one thing that always stood out about you, Esra, to me was that I have seen you have always promoted or somewhat worked to support men's mental health, which is something very interesting to me in the society we live in a globalist society we live in. Even there, men's mental health is being ignored, mainly due to a lot of reasons. And in no way I'm saying that women's mental health don't matter. But of course, a lot of guys, especially young adults, and even those who are married and more of an age, during that whole thing, I see that men's mental health is always ignored, especially in all the countries I have lived in, even here in this country. And I have noticed through the internet also that is something which is happening around the world. So what drew you to also focus on men's mental health, I wonder?
That's a great question. Thank you for sharing that information, and what you've said is very evident in much of what is universal. The reason why I have a lot of interest in men's and boys' mental health is because, as you mentioned, there is the masculinity, the stereotypical beliefs about how a man has to be. So it's being someone who should not express their emotions, be assertive, and should not seek psychological help because that puts them in a vulnerable position. And so I wanted to bring awareness about men's mental health is because I want to change the perception of people universally so that men can start seeking therapy because they're human, and if they're going to bottle up everything, that doesn't give them the chance to express, which can cause consequences such as expressing those feelings and thoughts through maladaptive behaviors. They may develop a substance use disorder, express those feelings and thoughts through anger and workaholism, etc.
That's, really hard to hear about. It's very tragic. Repression, of course, seems like a really severe issue, and especially with men's mental health these days, I think. In sociology, we use this term toxic masculinity. it's become a popular term in the culture, but it's misused sometimes a bit to make it seem like all masculinity is toxic. But as we teach in our classes, it's really this idea that when gender norms around masculinity or the expectations of masculinity, when they become harmful towards a person, when it restricts a person to the point where they are repressing parts of themselves and it becomes harmful to themselves even, that can be a form of toxic masculinity. So yeah, this is a very interesting topic. Especially gender norms around masculinity can be very restrictive.
It is. It is very much. And as you said, they're harming themselves, but they are also maybe harming society as well. And that becomes problematic to the whole society this time.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, these men and boys may commit suicide, as suicide rates for males are higher than females. Of course, we shouldn't overlook females' mental health, but also we shouldn't overlook mental health in general for men as well too.
I think, yeah, this is an issue that's been going on for a while. And generally, women are more likely to seek mental health counseling and therapies, right, than men are?
Yes, they are, very much. And this is learned through high school, university years, through social media, family members. And this is what I really want to change. I'm passionate about it because I am someone who has high empathy, which is one motive that has impacted me to go into the field of counseling psychology, so that I can make this world a better place to live for both diverse genders.
That's very nice. That's very noble. What are some of the challenges you think that men face when trying to seek help? Or, do you have some advice perhaps you can offer about men?
Great question. Men and boys may be reluctant to seek help because they fear judgments such as being perceived as feminine, and this can deteriorate their mental health significantly, and it has, according to evidence. There are many types of advice that I can give. One of them is to let these men and boys know that they're human and gender doesn't make them different. A man and a female are both human. So having this perception instead of having all these gender stereotypical beliefs, which is manipulating our beliefs, I'd say that letting these guys know there is something cognitive dissonance. So these men are thinking to themselves, I should be seeking therapy because I have these symptoms. I've done my research, for example, what is depression, what is social anxiety, what is other types of mental health problems, and so on. But the cognitive dissonance comes there because society says, no, you can't feel that way, you're a man, but if you express it, then you're going to lose that masculinity. And the cognitive dissonance comes there because they are fearing of that judgment. However, when they're having this experience, that's contributing additional problems because it's distress, and they're already having mental health problems, but then they're also having this societal pressure that has contributed more to the mental health, which can lead to adverse behaviors, adverse experiences, and which results in maladaptive thoughts and behaviors.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
Combining these things. Yeah, I can totally see that. We all know that from just daily life and experience. Being a man, you're generally expected to be strong, to not really show your emotions and not really talk about them so much. People ask how you are, you just say, I'm fine, right? That's the default answer. And yeah, in a way that can actually lead to some silencing of men and not being able to really express how they feel. In sociology, actually, I've seen some really interesting research coming about this lately, looking at sort of larger structural factors that have changed the experiences of men in recent times, we see, for example, escalating unemployment rates, especially among younger men, prime working ages from like 20s to 30s, when they should be like employed and sort of building their life. Instead, we're seeing growing unemployment rates in those areas and kind of a loss of some of the traditional norms around being like the family provider and that sort of thing. And, you know, there may be, additional social pressures on men because of these kind of larger changes that are beyond their control. And people may not realize that and take the responsibility on themselves for these global and economic kind of shifts that are occurring. I'm also interested in thinking about some age or generational differences. Do you think that the younger generations today view mental health differently than the older generations?
So before I get into that, I'd like to mention in Canada, there is a nonprofit organization, Voice of Men 360. I'm the administrator and researcher. We made a survey based on the negative impacts of social media on male youths in Canada. So the focus is on youths because this generation for them is a lot more different. Their perceptions have diverted. As you've mentioned, now there are societal factors, of course, but it is now changing in like high school and elementary, middle school. Mental health is spoken about. The problem is that because these high school students and students in other grades, they are around their peers who may have different perceptions, and this can impact their views. However, our survey, the aim was to collect enough answers to understand what's most important is the impact of social media, because what we see on social media manipulates people. And so with the results, if we do find negative results, we plan to create a workshop to help these youths navigate social media in a way that boosts their confidence and contributes positively to their mental health. And so the difference between the generations, I'd say, is that because social media and schools, everyone is more involved in making a difference. However, older generations, because as you've mentioned, the traditional norms in the past, they're very ingrained in these people, in these elder adults. However, now youths are helping to normalize seeking therapy to their elders because the perception is shifting.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like some positive news, although, social media is a really interesting point there. That brings up a lot of new problems as well that people are facing today. Yeah, I'm actually teaching about that today in my class a little bit. So coincidentally enough, I'm about to go and give a lecture to teach students how to manage their online profiles, their online presentation, how they appear online to other people.
What are the coincidences?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was actually about to ask you about those things because what I remember from our first episode that you have some sort of exposure with social media and internet hygiene, if we can say it that way.
Sure.
And I also have a very tech background and I'm also involved in cybersecurity and other types of things. One thing which we have seen as a consultant for cybersecurity, we have seen that through social media, through social engineering and other ways, for example, if there is an employee of a company who is a bit lonely and somehow you can social engineer him to give you company secrets, for example. Again, perhaps mental health can come into play in that factor too, that first of all, he doesn't know the internet hygiene. Second, somebody is taking advantage of his mental health perspectives.
Yeah.
We have seen those case studies many times. There's too many to mention that most of the biggest threat we face in cybersecurity is actually humans, the staff, the personnel.
Yeah.
And it's very important for them to also be very careful online.
Yeah, that's a big vulnerability. And the most vulnerable people often are the ones that are lonely, that are disaffected, that are feeling alienated from their surroundings, from their social group. And unfortunately, there's a lot of research today showing that social media does make this worse in a lot of ways. It kind of plays on our, it takes advantage of people's addictive nature, serotonin levels, and sort of dopamine responses and things like that, getting us basically doom scrolling all day. There's some really good literature about, like Robert Putnam, for example, wrote about the declining social capital in many modern countries today, about how we see basically the social fabric is actually kind of decreasing, and we see less and less sort of volunteer groups and social groups, and more individualism, more isolated people, more loneliness. And even with technology now, it's supposedly connecting us all, but it also has the effect in some ways of kind of making us more alone, right? Like there's a book by Sherry Turkle called Alone Together, which is a great title because you can think, you can visualize, those people sitting at the dinner table where everyone's staring at their phone and nobody's actually talking to each other kind of situations, right? So yeah, unfortunately the loneliness epidemic, I think, has been a big issue lately, especially with technology and social media.
True. And also, for example, when we talk about this young youth, in a lot of countries, especially in the Gulf, where the weather tends to be very hot, and these countries used to have good capital. For example, each family tends to have more money to spend. Mm-hmm. And what happens to their kids is they tend to become obese and more lonely because they're always playing PlayStation at home. They can't go out, weather is too hot. There is not much to socialize with. Mm-hmm. Growing up in that atmosphere, I've seen it. Mm-hmm. And over there, especially young adults, they tend to feel even more lonely and isolated because at home they can't really, hang out with your parents. I mean, perhaps you can, but not always.
Yeah.
And you can't also go out because the weather is too hot, and you need to go in a car because there's not good public transportation. Mm-hmm. Roads are built in a way which is only for cars. This is mainly in Dubai and Gulf.
Yeah,
I think same in America. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, definitely.
And they can't drive because they're young adults. So they stick to playing PlayStation, other types of game at home, and then they also tend to become more violent, more aggressive in nature. Mm-hmm. And these type of things needs to be addressed. Luckily, in Turkish and European societies, this issue is perhaps not there about obesities, and they have more better infrastructure. Kids can go outside.
Yeah, it's not as bad, or at least not yet. I think there's still some technological creep happening, but one thing that's really nice about Turkey that I love, it is such a walkable place. Everywhere you go, people are outside, people are being very social. I love that people will
Smoking.
Go to and have dinner and spend 3 hours sitting in the restaurant, talking. That's such a Turkish thing, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, the same, still these risks are there, right? I mean, the same potential is there, people getting hooked in video games and spending too much time online, basically. This is kind of a global issue at this point.
True, I agree. And one thing I wonder about this university, TED University, is that maybe in your class, we can start with that. Do you think there is a good infrastructure on campus? If a student wants to seek mental health, is there some sort of counseling happening on campus?
Yeah, it's tough working with students these days. I do see some students struggling with mental health issues, especially young men, because in social sciences these days, honestly, there's actually more women. We have far more female students than male, which is kind of a trend in social sciences in particular. And the male students do tend to be have less peers like within their own group, and so that's additional a challenge to them seeking therapy. But fortunately, an institution like TED does have a lot of good resources. We have counseling services here. We have a great psychology department that offers a number of services. There's a lot of student groups as well that people can get involved with, which offer not just hobbies, but, the kind of social interactions that people need. I think that's really key, just having that face-to-face interaction, and even just having this like a campus where you can hang out, where you can just be around people and you can make friends easily. I think that's something that, maybe that's one of the reasons why I like being a professor, because I love it too. I miss that from when I was young.
True, I agree. And about this campus particularly, what I like is there's a lot of open spaces. Mm-hmm. I see people tend to be more extrovert over here, just walking around. Like today while I was coming to the studio with Esra, and I noticed people were talking, and you see I think it's a lot of Turkish or maybe perhaps European culture where people are way more open to mingle with each other, especially young adults.
Yeah.
And this is something I've seen in Ankara, to be very honest. People are willing to socialize. Most of the people I know, they're not they don't have some sort of anxiety to socialize, because we also organize events at Ankara Expat. For example, we did one with your campus too, and there were some students, they never met each other before on campus, and they were supposed to collaborate for music, for Expat Jam. They did it perfectly fine. Like they were not afraid to, or they were not feeling shy of something about themselves. And this is something I've noticed in Ankara. What do you think, Esra? Do you agree with me that in Ankara people are more confident?
In Ankara, people are very extrovert. I agree. Especially when I compare it to Canada, where it's more like fast-paced. They go to Starbucks or a coffee shop and they get their coffee to take away. They go to either work or somewhere. Whereas in Turkey, I've noticed that people actually sit down, and it's not a few people, but it is just how they interact. I observe how extrovert they are, how they're very close to each other, or they're not, but they sit down and they drink their coffee and they socialize.
Or chai.
Or chai.
That's one of my favorite things about Turkey, to be honest, compared to, at least in my anecdotal experience of the United States. Yeah, everyone is so in a hurry in the US. Everyone is just grinding away at work all the time. And in Turkey, it does seem to be a bit more of a relaxed pace and more emphasis on just socializing and enjoying life. I think that's incredibly valuable. Maybe it's one of those things that I only notice as a foreigner, as someone who's come from outside, but I find that really beautiful.
Yes, I agree. And I've also noticed that a lot of the Turkish people, I don't want to generalize for the whole population, but they smoke a lot of cigarettes.
It is a smoking place.
After one, like I've sat down in a coffee shop and I did observe, and they're drinking coffee and they're like several times each person is smoking. It was interesting.
I asked my students in class once, like, what is the main way that dating happens these days among you guys, among young people? I asked them, like, are you using dating apps or whatever? They actually told me it's the smoking areas on campus. Like, that's where they hang out and socialize between classes. That's where most of the, like, social interaction is happening.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. At least on the campuses, yeah.
That's enlightening.
I'd just like to add one thing. Whoever told you that was telling absolutely true. Most of the friends I made, some of them I met like at a cafe or at a bar, and I was just went to smoke outside, and then we just said, hi, how are you, where you from, and then we ended up becoming friends. And I think it's more of a general smoking culture. Maybe it's related to psychology, I don't know, but it's a sense of community. Like, will you go out and you're smoking with some general people? Not that I'm supporting smoking at all.
Yeah, we're not telling you to go smoke.
Yeah, it's just, I think it's a sense of, in Turkey, that plays a big role. Again, not to generalize it at all.
Yeah, in a broad sense, having it just a shared space and a purpose to be in that space gives you an excuse to be social, And I think that's something to take away for anyone who is struggling with loneliness or looking for connections. You don't have to become a smoker specifically, but any kind of structured activity that you can join where you're in a shared space with people, joining a group, joining a student club, something like that can be really beneficial.
Basically, you need an icebreaker, right? Is that where we're going with it? A sense of belonging in a community. Like this issue we face in Ankara Expat also, by the way. Especially we have a certain types of people in our community, especially those who are diplomats. They tend to live in their own circle in their embassy. They have their own friends and family. But when they leave these embassy grounds, they don't have much friends. And they don't really go out and socialize because most of them can't even speak Turkish.
Yeah.
And that's why they come to communities like us, organizations like us. They join our events. Slowly, I have also noticed that they try to ask for something, like I need help with this, just so they can break in an icebreaker with me, and then I can let them join into the community also. And I think everybody wants to not be alone. There is a term I remember called being a loner. I think those people who say that, they genuinely don't want to be also 100% loner.
Yeah, but they just don't know how to not be a loner in a way. Like they need an excuse, they need a reason to break into that social circle.
That's where we are trying our best. Esra, what do you think about this?
I agree, actually. I'd like to say something. I am providing psychological therapy in Turkey, and what I've realized with my clients who are foreigners, they speak English. Some also speak Turkish, but a lot of them do mention about feeling lonely and needing that community. And I think that Ankara Expat is very something big and providing this to these people. I do refer them to Ankara Expat.
Thank
you. Yes.
And we're not that big, we are small. I think by design, we are very selective, but thank you for those.
Of course, it is something big to be in a foreign country, this organization in a foreign country that is still developing. And I think it's amazing how you are supporting these foreigners because they're new into a country and they need to meet people and make friends. But then when they are in university where there are Turkish people, they may feel excluded. And this can also contribute to their mental health, possibly leading to social anxiety, depression. By giving them the opportunity to engage in your events, allows them to meet new people, have purpose, and have maybe like-minded people, either from their cultural background or from a different cultural view, such as Western culture, which is normalized to every culture, being inclusive. Your organization is very inclusive, and that's very important as well.
Thank you so much. And we are trying our best. And we are also working to understand the issues of an expat who's in a foreign country. The first thing is perhaps mental health. They feel isolated. They feel they don't belong here. Somehow they're living in their own bubble. But we are trying to break that bubble for them, just to let them know that actually a lot of people in Ankara, Turkish people in Ankara, also are very curious and they want to hang out and get to know expats from different parts of the world. And we are trying our best to organize events in arts, culture, cinema, workshops, in any way to break those ice. Also, be it inter-expat dialogues, but we're also working very actively over the few years to have bridges between expats and locals.
Mm-hmm.
That's the most important part for me, not the inter-expat thing.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to generalize, but a lot of Turkish people have not been exposed to expats, especially in Ankara, Istanbul perhaps. So for them, most of them don't even speak English or any other language other than Turkish. We want to make a bridge that they understand that expats are also people, and we also are trying to fight racism in the very, very long run. Even if we are helping one Turkish person to have a expat friend, perhaps down the line he would be more diverse mentally, because this is something which is actually happening very much in Ankara. A lot of people, if you go to my neighborhood, even my neighbor, they live in a very, very Turkish way of life. They never meet any foreigners. Even if they do, they're not their friends. They work in Turkish companies, they study in Turkish schools. So we're trying to really bridge that gap.
Ankara is a very Turkish city. It's mostly Turkish people. There's nothing adverse about that. But as a foreigner living in Ankara, that is a bit challenging. But honestly, everyone I've ever met here has been more than friendly. Everyone is very welcoming, very curious. And as an expat person myself, I can definitely confirm, it is an alienating experience to be in a new country for the first time where there's a lot you don't know. Finding ways of being able to interact with other people, with local people especially, to become more a part of the culture, that's what I want more than anything. And it's tough. In my time here, I've ended up, some of the best friends I've made have been like the guy working at the local bakkal, next door to my apartment that I see all the time when I go and buy drinks and stuff. And like, I'm always trying to practice my Turkish with him and people like that. And, because I don't have that much opportunity to interact with too many Turkish people. But the ones, that I do, it's great. Yeah, I think Ankara Expat, this kind of group, is such a important kind of thing, especially for folks like me, to have an opportunity to do that.
True. And again, Turkish people, one of the nicest people I've ever met.
Yeah.
I've lived in a couple of countries, but over here, if there's something, I get into a trouble or anything, they're always there to help.
Mm-hmm.
And most of them have even gone out of their way to assist me.
Treat you like family,
Basically.
Like they meet you for the first time, you can be a complete stranger, and they're just right away willing to treat you like a member of their own family.
True.
It's incredibly warm people that I've met here.
True. And that's why I still live in Ankara. In the beginning, I was very bored. I did not understand anything, but
Yeah.
as time passed, I fell in love with the city, and more importantly, with the people of the city. The city itself, perhaps, is debatable if there is something good or not, but the people of the city, I really love.
Yeah,
What
they
do you
call it
think,
the
Esra?
gray city, right? I've heard
Yeah.
that from a lot of local people, but I love it too. Yeah, I enjoy it a lot.
Do you agree with this, Esra?
Yeah, of course. I was raised in Canada, but when I moved to Turkey and I stayed here for several years, I also had a similar experience. And I think it's like more related to being a collectivistic culture, just really, as Dr. Jared mentioned, feeling like you're part of a family. I totally agree with that.
So, before we wrap up, just to bring everything around full circle again, Esra, would you have any advice that you would offer for people, anyone really, but especially young men who might be silently struggling with their own mental health and looking for a way to connect with others?
Yeah, of course. It's an important question. I would tell them that they're not alone, and whatever they're feeling, whether it's overwhelmness, angry, or broken, it's part of the human experience. You can heal, grow, and come back stronger. Strength isn't about silence, it's about being honest and facing challenges. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say, I'm not okay. You deserve support, peace, and understanding, not judgment. Remember, you're not alone in this fight, and seeking help is powerful.
That's nice. Very positive message.
Yes, it is.
Truly inspiring. And thank you. I say this as a guy, a man. Thank you for contributing because this is really, really stigmatized. And I think it's been stigmatized in a lot of cultures. It's not just particularly a third world thing. Even in the first world, I've heard about situations like these. And also thank you for letting us know about the NGO you mentioned, Voice of Men. Again, amazing work you're doing. Please carry on. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure being here and being part of this entertaining and enlightening experience.
More to come. With Crossroads Conversations, I think this is our second episode. We are planning to have more guests like Esra and more conversations to share.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned for the next episode coming soon. We'll have more interesting topics for you. Thanks for listening. Take care.